But there are things that happen on a much shorter time scale. If you dump enough material onto the surface of this star, you can actually get what you call a classical nova. You can actually start a fusion explosion on the surface of the star, which is really interesting. Not in the core like we're used to with stars, but you get an explosion which pretty much just resets you back to what you had before. It pretty much blows away all of the stuff that accreted. It might even make your accretion disk a little bit more unstable. It might even make it easier for more material to pile on next time. And so this happens again and again. And we see these recurrent events happening on a human lifetime. We see them happening every few years. We see them happening, well, it doesn't have any more common than that, but that's amazing when you talk about an astronomical thing. We don't have to look at like a million of these objects to see these things throughout their whole cycle like we do with a lot of different objects in astrophysics. We can actually study several cycles of the same object in a single lifetime, which is really useful. The other interesting thing is that if you manage to put enough material onto this star, you can actually compress it so much that even its power of degeneracy, even this incredible resistance it has to compression, is no longer able to hold itself up. And you get what we call a type 1a supernova. You actually get a situation where the white dwarf, we think, can completely destroy itself. Now this is what I want to show you. I'm going to turn the lights off because this is just fantastic. So what happens? Well, the core of the white dwarf, which is under the most pressure, something happens. The degeneracy is violated and an explosion starts happening. So we see that the explosion propagates all the way through from somewhere near the center, all the way to the surface. Now the one on the left-hand side is pressure, the one on the right-hand side is just cool graphics. So you can see now that we have a pressure wave, an explosive shock wave moving around the entire object. Now, to put this in perspective, this object is about as big as the Earth, and it has about the mass of the Sun. In fact, for this to happen, it has exactly 1.4 times the mass of the Sun, the translational mass. So you can see that these waves keep going. The piece of popcorn on the right-hand side is done. It's fine. But this is the amazing thing. You have these shock waves that move all the way around. They get to the other side. They build up the pressure higher and higher and higher. And it really looks like something's going to happen, doesn't it? Yeah. Funnily enough, we don't have movies of this. Not good movies, anyway. So what I'm going to show you is what happens next. Can you guess what's going to happen? Somebody. Collapse? What's another option? There you go. Excellent. It already collapsed because it collapsed in terms of the degeneracy. It actually started pushing the parts too close together. They really had fun with spinning around that movie, didn't they? They were like, well, you know, we spent like 5 years on this. I'm going to make it spin. You're sitting in the lab and that's really cool. I like it. Alright. Time to put the lights up a little bit. So, not only can we have these recurrent nova events, these classical nova, these really interesting events because they tell us about a really common body in the universe. And in fact, they allow us to study the process of accretion that happens all over the place. Now, you probably noticed accretion was happening when those stars were forming, right? Disks were forming around the stars. The stuff was falling down into a disk. Now, we see accretion disks on every single scale in astrophysics. We see them in stellar formation. We see them in galaxies. We see them in some other really interesting objects like black holes, because anything with gravity that has stuff falling towards it tends to form a disk. And some of these disks are really hard to study. So we can use these disks, which are at slightly lower energy, to figure some stuff out. It's a really useful thing, because these things are all over the place. And we're seeing all sorts of activity from disk, which is really useful. But I was going to tell you what happens to this object right now. Oh, one more thing. In that movie, which took 1 minute 20 on the right-hand side and about like 1 billion years on the left-hand side, that was 10 seconds of real time for the star. These stars destroy themselves completely in less than 10 seconds. After a lifetime of perhaps tens of billions of years, they will destroy themselves in real time in 10 seconds. This is what Hollywood thinks this looks like. Just really, it's great. I was going to play that with no sound, because of that, of course, it's a little bit more realistic. That would have been nice. That's okay. These are super ears. This is good. But it's no joke. These objects can destroy themselves completely. It's amazing. I'm on the last slide. I'm ready to go. Okay. This is what I tend to think of in terms of these objects. So I'm going to show you that now. When they explode. So, white dwarf explosion, end of its lifetime, incredible amounts of energy, type 1a supernova,